Good everyone, welcome back to our next edition of Econ Talks. Now I've taken us on the road this time. You'll see that I'm coming in from my car for this call. I'm out in the middle of the Waikato at the moment, having a look around, seeing what's happening in the local economies, which is sort of quite apt given that the topic of this conversation is around what we're seeing out there in the regional economies. Gareth, we've looked out over the end of 2024 with our latest quarterly economic monitor at Infometrics, and although it's obviously still been tough, there are some sort of early, small, tentative signs of that economic turnaround starting to show through. And what I thought was really interesting is we do expect that economic activity at the end of 2024 was lower than a year ago, that December quarter being about 0.5% lower on our provisional estimate than December 2023. However, the differences across areas was quite stark. The likes of metro areas down by an estimated 0.6%, so a much sort of sharper fall. But at the same time, the likes of provincial economies a little bit more in the middle, down, but only down 0.3%. But rural economies actually up 0.1. Not huge by any stretch of the imagination, but just a little bit more momentum coming through. And I think there's sort of two elements to that. There's a little bit of international tourism, particularly in the South Island, that's been supporting activity. We saw a few more arrivals at the end of the year. That helped the likes of Otago region be the only part of New Zealand that we found that had an increase in employment compared to a year ago in the December quarter. But the likes of Canterbury and the West Coast also doing all right. But more generally, what's coming through is the primary sector is starting to support a lot more activity. We know that the dairy payout, for example, is expected to bring something like $19.2 billion through to regional economies for the season that we're currently in, at that 10 kilogram of milk solid milk price coming through. That's $4.5 billion more than last season. There are some big numbers here. I mean, it's not just dairy though. The wider primary sector, Gareth, seems to be in the all right position too.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at those commodity prices over the last 15 to, 24 months or so, right across dairy, meat, horticulture, they have all been improving to varying degrees over a period of time, but they're all up 35 to 40% from their low points, whether that was late 23 or late 22 in the case of horticulture. So there's been a sustained increase, which has become more widespread over the last year or so, as we've seen sort of meat and dairy join the party that horticulture had been having. So, I mean, you mentioned that $4.5 billion on the dairy payout, which is a reasonably easy number to get your head around. It's a bit more difficult working out what the impact in the sort of meat and horticulture sectors will be, but it will still be significantly positive. And I think it's important when you put that in the context of the impact that we're expecting in terms of lower interest rates coming through for households over the course of this year. We've estimated that to be maybe in the order of $2.1 billion by the end of this year. So dairy on its own is more than twice as large as that. You've got meat and obviously horticulture adding some more through as well. So it's not too surprising to me, given that sort of trend in commodity prices has been upward for several months or several quarters now, in fact, that you're starting to see just the turnaround and the signs of the economy beginning to improve more markedly in those provincial areas than you are in the metro areas, which are still feeling the effects in terms of domestic economic activity, feeling the effects of those higher interest rates, hitting areas still like construction, professional services, a whole lot of industries which tend to be more concentrated in the urban centres. So, I mean, looking forward through the course of this year, maybe it's going to be a bit of an old-fashioned New Zealand economic recovery where it's led by the primary sector and eventually that flows through from the rural areas and we start to see a bit more activity happening and a bit more growth coming through in those metro areas and in the cities.
Yeah, you're totally right. And I mean, some of the numbers in the primary sector, like you've highlighted with dairy, are substantial. I mean, the likes of the beef price as well, up 8.8% on where it was a year ago. The likes of kiwi fruit exports, I think, was something like 35-40% higher over the last season than what you had before. I mean, there's some serious cash coming through. And the big change as well is that part of that is just revenue. Money going through the pipe starts to move things along and means more activity. But for a lot of primary sector businesses, there's also the fact that on-farm costs are leveling out, if not falling, like you say, with those interest rates also coming through on farm. And so you've now got this position where if you look at almost effective profitability, that's getting better. Some of that will go on debt repayments because, you know, the likes of the primary sector has had to bring on some high levels of debt recently, but more of it starts to wash through. The other part, I think, is that it's not just the primary sector. That's sort of the biggest and the earliest sign, but you've got a number of other sort of indicators coming through. Retail trade activity, for example, at the end of last year showing a bit of a tick up, and in fact sort of the first real turn in per capita spending in quite a while. Again, not huge, not massive, not enough to sort of completely overhaul the economy, but it's a change in direction, and that sort of starts to add in. The same with the likes of job ads that have been plateauing now the last couple of months. You're seeing a few of those health sale figures that have been increasing, building consents that have stopped dropping like they were before. You know, there's just a number of indicators coming through. One interesting one that we did see that hit the metro areas a lot more in recent times has been a bit of a drop away in manufacturing activity. And it's been interesting, that sort of trend the last year where there just hasn't been as much production because no one's been needing as many goods. So you didn't need to create as much in the factory. Now some of the latest data from January showed that for the first time in something like 2 years, just about, you saw a slight month-on-month lift. Now, you know, 1 month out of 24 doesn't, you know, correct fully through. You've still got net 23 months of down, but it's a bit of that sort of changing position as well. And we know that not all parts of the economy are going to move at the same speed, but it certainly has been encouraging to see some of those sort of early signs emerging. Certainly, look, getting across regional areas already in parts of the rural economy, you do start to see that greater level of support coming through. People are talking more optimistically. They can see some of that. It's not all complete good news. Some areas across the country are drier than others. I think I saw an announcement even in recent days around some parts of the country that are in a bit more of a drought state, and so of course that causes some concerns for the future, but a lot of other areas sort of a better starting position for many. I think that's encouraging for the regional economy. We'll leave it there for now. I'll get back on the road. I'll go and see how much more mud I can get on my shoes before I return to the Ivory Tower of Wellington, and we'll see all of you again on one of our future editions of Econ Talks.